Greetings, friends and neighbors, cyber neighbors, YouTube world, YouTube Lokai Nama. Ready for this exciting installment of Phaladipika? What is it today? May 17th? Or today's, yeah, it's probably still the 17th for you guys. So let's jump in. We got authentic Vedic aspects. Let me start off by saying just like there's popular Western astrology, which has been simplified, and sometimes to an extreme. You know, Vedic Western astrology can be simplified so extreme that we only care what month you were born, or it can be simplified to various degrees. Similarly, it's the same in India. And there is a simplified version of Vedic planetary aspects floating around with which I would say, I'm not sure because I'm out of touch, especially since Corona, but which I would probably estimate that about 75 or 80% of the people actually using Vedic astrology believe is the full version of the Vedic aspects. So this session today will clear that up. It will show the actual version of what Vedic aspects really are. Vedic aspects are a bit different from the way aspects are used in Persian techniques and in the systems that are based on that. So in other words, in Western astrology, in that not every planet aspects the same angle. The way Tajikas or Persians did it was they said every planet can aspect these particular angles. And the word aspect actually means to look at something from a certain angle. You know, when we say a certain aspect of a subject, it means one way of looking at it. Or in architecture, when you draw a building from a certain angle, it's called an aspect. In astrology, aspect means looking at something, being able to see something because you have a certain angle on it. Even in English, these phrases are still current. Oh, she has an interesting angle on that. So the Persians, they said any planet, if you're at 90-degree angle to another, you have an interesting angle on it. If you're 120 degrees angle, you know. But the Vedic system is not every planet has the same vision, has the same eyesight. And it does make a lot of sense, and hopefully I'll be able to explain it. And there is also, if you want to ask, I can answer it later. There's a definite relationship between the two systems, between the Vedic or the Indian system and the Persian or the Western system, between the shapes and etc. and the plants. If you want to go into that, if we have time at the end, I can do that too. So let's jump in and see how Mantreshwar is going to explain aspects in Phaladipika. He puts it in his section on the planets. So after he's telling you Jupiter represents this, Saturn represents this, Jupiter's this kind of person, Saturn is this kind of person, then he tells you about the relationships between the planets. Jupiter is neutral to Saturn, Saturn is neutral to Jupiter. Moon loves Mercury, Mercury hates the moon. He talks about that, and then he jumps into this. And he does this in 2 lines or 1 sentence. Maybe you could say 2 sentences in Sanskrit. He describes the whole aspect system in 2 sentences. So it's going to be pretty compact, but it's pretty brilliant. So here we go. I'll show you what it is. He says, I don't know, can you see this? Hopefully if you have a bigger screen, you can see this. Shauryagne Ravijo Guru Satu Shauragye Ravijo Guru Sutao Paumas Chatur Tashtamao Purnam Pashyati Septamam Cha Sakalas Teshvandri Vrithya Kramat. That is it. That describes the whole Vedic aspect system. It's just like 1 or 2 sentences. Words are color-coded, you'll see why. The first point that he makes is that every planet can fully see its seventh house. So you see, he uses the word pashyati. Pashyati means to see, like we were talking about in the introduction. Aspects is about the ability to see something because you're at a certain angle with it. Like, I can look out a window right now and see a light post that's on the other street. But if I went downstairs and into my backyard, I wouldn't be able to see that same thing. And I'm not physically any closer or further from that light post, but because of the angle that I have, I can see it or not see it. That's what aspects are about. It's a way of me being able to contact a different point, not by physical proximity, but by the angle that I have to that physical point. So it's called pashya, which means to see. Planets can see other points. And he uses the word purnam. Purnam pashyati. This is a funny typo, Zina. Purnam pashyati means to see it fully. So this is another important point that the simplified version of Vedic aspects loses. That aspects may be purnam or apurnam. They might be full or some lesser amount. Generally, when people speak about aspects in any simplified form of astrology, be it Western or Vedic, they just talk about whether there is an aspect or not. But in either system, if you actually don't simplify it and use it in its full form, we talk about how strong the aspect is. How much of an aspect is there? The Western system tries to do it in terms of an orb, like an amount of space from a deviation amount from the exact angle, and that's actually exactly the way it works in the Vedic system as well, although we don't use orbs because it's not the same for every planet or for every angle. Every angle has a different fall off and ramp up. You'll see. So the two concepts so far are purnam pashyati, that some planets can fully see another point, and he says sakala, every planet can fully see the seventh. Now, the way that they're going to talk about things, the way that we would be used to it if you're coming from a Western background is you'll say 180 degrees away from you. That's what the seventh angle is. We simplify things by just saying the first angle for 30 degrees, or first angle for 0 degrees, second angle for 60, third, what would we say? First for 30, second for 60, third for 90, fourth, no. We want to start with 1. 1 is the conjunction, 2 is 30, 3 is 60, right, Saturn does 3, 4 is 90, 5 is 120 or trine, 6 is 150, and 7 is 180. You just add 30 degrees. It's just everything divided by 3 to get houses or spaces. So he says every planet, sakala, fully sees purnam pashyati, it's saptama, the seventh place from it. Then he says there's other planets that have additional things. I did 2 at once. He says Saturn, also, it's 3rd and 10th. So Ravija is Saturn. See the color? Ravija also sees the 3rd house, which is Shodya, and the 10th house, which is Agya. So it's interesting, it's a little tricky to translate the verse because I know it's 3 and 10, but to try to figure out how he's describing it as 3 and 10. It took a couple of minutes to realize that he's naming the houses. The 3rd house is called Shaurya, which means heroism, and the 10th house is called Agya, which means command or dominance. And I believe that he's doing so in an attempt to kind of help you remember which planet does what. So because Saturn is so malefic and tough, then it has these very tough, it can see these very tough places, the 3rd and the 10th. So Shora Ge Ravijo Guru Shora Ge Ravijo. That's it. Very simple thing. So every planet fully sees its 7th house. Saturn also can fully see its 3rd and its 10th. That doesn't mean the 3rd and the 10th. It means its 3rd and its 10th. So if Saturn is in your 2nd house, then it will fully see your 4th, 8th, and 11th. Because the 4th, 8th, and 11th are the 3rd, 7th, and 10th for Saturn, because Saturn is in your 2nd. If this is like number soup for you, just practice it. Just look at it, and it's very simple. Just practice using it. So he says Saturn, every planet fully sees its 7th house. Saturn also sees its 3rd and 10th. Guru Sutao. And Jupiter, Guru, also sees Guru. Easy to remember, right? Guru is the name for 9th house. And Sutta. Jupiter also represents children, right? So Guru sees Guru and Sutta. It sees the 9th and the 5th. So Jupiter can fully see 7th, 5th, and 9th. And then there's one more planet. Now, anything interesting about these planets that have special aspects? What do they have in common? Why do they have special aspects? Mars can also fully see its 4th and 8th. Bahoma is Mars. It's a synonym for Kuja, earthborn. Because the deity from Mars was born from the deity of the earth. Baumas Chatut. Now here he gives up on naming I also thought this was funny. He gave up on naming the houses and he just gives you the numbers. Because it doesn't really make that much sense here, especially for the 4th. That Mars would aspect the 4th. If you're going by, it represents this house thing, which is what he was doing for Saturn and Jupiter. But I'll explain the sense to this as we go through. Baumas Chatur Tashtamo. Mars also the 4th and 8th. Ashta is 8 and Chatur is 4. Is there anything, do you see anything in common? What does Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn have in common compared to the other planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Venus? If you know that, then it will also make sense why they have special aspects. If you remember, that aspect is a line of sight. Should I reveal it? Let me see if anybody... The lag, what do they call it? A buffer is so long that I have to wait so long. Very good, Liberty and Unita. He says that they're all outside of the Earth's orbit. These are all the outer planets. So they're further away from things. And in fact, you'll see that the further they get away, the more powerful their ability to see things are. They have a bigger view on things. They can see a bigger picture, so they can see it. Right. So that's actually the sense to the whole thing. All right. So there's the red stuff. The red letters in this shlok have not been translated yet, right? Every planet fully sees its 7th house. Puryam Pashati Saptamam cha Sakalas. Saturn also its 3rd and 10th. Surya Ge Ravijo Guru, and then Jupiter also its 5th and 9th. Guru Sutao. And Mars also its 4th and 8th. Baumas Chatur Tashtama. What about this red part? Te Shu Andrivridya Kramat. This we have to go back and get this phrase again. Purnam Pashati, because it's in the same sentence. Purnam Pashati. Oh, I'm sorry. Sakala. All the other planets. Teshu Andri, Andhra Pradesh. You know, Andhra means lower. Teshu, in these places. Which places? 4 and 8, 5 and 9, 3 and 10. In these places, the other planets, Cha, here the word Cha is brought in. The other planets, they get progressively, which is kramat. This is a very important word, progressively, kramat. And vritya means incrementally. Andra, less. They get progressively less power. incrementally, they lose their power progressively in these places. Now, that requires a lot of explanation. So let's use some visuals now to help you. So let's give you a visual for this first. That every planet fully sees its 7th house. This is the simplest thing. Just because look at where the 7th house is compared to where a planet is. And you could rotate this anywhere you want. You could put that planet in. If the planet was in 12, then the arrow would be going to 6. If the planet was in 2, then the arrow would be going to 8. So what it means is a planet can fully see its 7th house. Why? Because you're right in front of my face. If you're in my 7th house, that means you're right in front of me. Every planet can see, everybody can see something that's right in front of it. So 7th house is always fully seen. That means the 180-degree aspect. But be careful when you're assuming that something is in the 7th house from something else. Be careful. Just because something is in Aries and something else is in Libra doesn't mean that they're actually 180 degrees apart. And yes, that is important. You'll see why by the time you get to the end. And that's not a YouTube trick to get you to watch to the end. It's just that you won't see why until you know the whole thing. So this is every planet fully sees its 7th house. Saturn also sees its 3rd house and its 10th house. So Saturn also has the view on the 7th and then also has these. Well, that's what Saturn's aspect pattern looks like. Very interesting. Was what? That's a half trine? I think they call that a sextile. Right? Because it's 60. There's this interesting aspect in Western astrology that's people don't know whether to use it or not. And probably the reason why it's so confusing is because it's only Saturn really affects it. And only Saturn affects it on going forward. In Western astrology, they think that they'll say 60 degrees forward is the same as 60 degrees backwards. So if Saturn can see the 3rd house, it could also see the 11th house. But no, in Vedic astrology, they say, no, Saturn can see the 3rd house. Doesn't mean it can see the 11th house. The 11th house is a different angle. Maybe it doesn't have the same vision out of the left eye as it has out of the right. So that's Saturn's pattern. Jupiter can also see its 5th and 9th. That's what Jupiter's pattern looks like. See, it's very triangular. Trine. The nature of a trine. The nature of a trine is benefic. The nature of a square is malefic. You see where Saturn is? Saturn's place of a strong aspect is in the 10th, which is a trine backwards. Which is a square backwards, right? It's 270 degrees. And Jupiter's strong places are 240 and 120, which are the 2 trine points. Hence, the concept in Persian astrology that trines are benefic and squares are malefic. So I'm leaving the marks on these points because later they're going to be important. I'm leaving Saturn's mark on 3 and 10 and Jupiter's mark on 5 and 9. Then finally he described Mars. It also has a 4 and an 8. So Mars can fully see these places. So you see the other square is the 4th. And that's the other malefic planet, Mars. Okay? Now, here's the part that gets tricky. Every other planet gets progressively less power in those places. Teishu, in those places. What places? The places that have the marks on them. So 8, 9, and 10, for example. Every planet can fully see the 7th house, but we'll also see the places that Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn can see, but with progressively less power. Now, let's understand progressively less power in 2 steps. First, let's just get the simple version of it. That means that it would a planet like Venus, for example, would see the 7th house with 100% clarity. But the 8th house would be a step down from 100% clarity. The 9th house it would see with another step down. 2 steps down. And the 10th house would be 3 steps down from perfect clarity. And then the 11th would be 0. So 4 steps down in total. That's by quarters. So you say 3/4, 2/4, and 1/4, or 75%, 50%, 25%. So a planet like Venus or Mercury or the Moon or the Sun will see the 7th house with 100% clarity, but we'll see the 8th with 75% clarity, the 9th with 50% clarity, and the 10th with 25% clarity. And on the other side, we'll have the same step downs in those places. The place that belongs to Mars would be, it's the place that it has 75%. The place that belongs to Jupiter would be 50%. The place that belongs to Saturn would be 25%. That's why he described it in that order. He described it as Saturn does this, Jupiter does this, Mars does this. Every other planet can see the 7th and then steps down in those places in that order that I described them. So here is a visual for you. This is any planet, like any inner planet. They'll have a 75% aspect to the 8th house and the 4th house. This goes overlooked in common Vedic astrology. Completely overlooked. In common Vedic astrology, they ignore everything except the 100% aspects. Their class on the aspects will be this. Every planet can see the 7th house. Mars can also see the 4th and 8th. Jupiter can also see the 5th and 9th. Saturn can also see the 3rd and 10th. You're done. Any questions? Finished. So when they have Mars being exactly square to Venus, they're not going to think that it's a mutual aspect. They're going to miss the whole thing that Venus has any influence on Mars. And how much, this is another good question if you maybe have it or would have it soon, how much of an aspect really gives an effect? In my experience, it's pretty much around the 70% point. And also it's situational. So I'll explain this. Objectively speaking, it's around 70% and up. The planet can see something clear enough to have a noticeable impact on it. By the way, when you look at something, drishti we call it, when you look at something with drishti, you're actually making the subject know that you've seen it. It's like an intentional glance. And so it's like when a mother keeps her eye on a child, then the child behaves. So the same way, when the planets do drishti, or they look at something else, when they're keeping their eye on it, is a good English phrase. That point will now feel the influence of that planet that's looking at it. And so we'll start to try to behave in a way that won't upset that planet. So it's a way for a planet to influence another point besides the place where it is. If a planet can see something with about less than 70%, it's not really clear enough. But over 70%, so that means these points of 75% are still strong. That's objectively speaking. The other thing that I noticed in practice is that it's situational. If you have a planet where the strongest aspect to it is 50% from some other planet, right? Let's say you have the moon and it's got no aspects except it's got a 50% aspect from the sun. Then actually that 50% aspect is the biggest influence on the moon, and it's still since it's not outshined by anything else, it's still more noticed by the moon. So those are two ways for you to use these numbers. The first thing is the strongest aspect on a planet will have an effect no matter what it is, as long as it's probably above like 30%. And then if you have competing aspects, it's really any aspect above 70-ish, more like 75 or above, 70-ish and above. Between 70 and 75 is questionable. Is an aspect that you should take note of and consider, not ignore. All right, so every planet does the aspects of 75% clarity to 4 and 8. Every planet does 50% aspect to Jupiter spots, 5 and 9, and every planet has 25% aspect to Saturn spots, which is 3 and 10. Now, going back to the theory behind this, remember, the theory is the reason why Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn have special aspects is because they're exterior planets. What do they call them? Outer planets. They're outside the Earth. They're further away from the sun than the Earth. Which you will note, even if you don't have a heliocentric model, you'll note that they're exterior planets because their retrogression patterns are significantly different. So even if you don't have a heliocentric model, you'll come up with the same thing, that Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars are different than these other guys. Now, the further away that you go, the more the power of the aspect increases. So let me show you what I mean by that. Mars has gotten 100% to the spots where other planets have 75. So even Jupiter, for example, has a 75% aspect to 8 and 4. And Jupiter also has 25 aspect to 10 and 3. So every planet has a 75% aspect to 4 and 8, except Mars. Mars has 100%. So what Mars has gotten is a 25% advantage in the 8 and a 25% advantage in the 4. So Mars's sum total of superiority to a normal planet is 50%. Jupiter has taken that bonus to the 5th and the 9th, each one giving him 50. So Jupiter's total increase of aspectual power is 100. And Saturn's got it on 10-3, which is usually 25. So Saturn has 75 and 75, 150. So Mars is 50 points more powerful than the average planet. Jupiter is 100 points more powerful than the average planet. Saturn's 150 points more powerful than the average planet when it comes to the ability to give aspects anywhere, to influence by its vision anything. And that also corresponds to the amount of superiority distance it is from the Earth. So this is probably the theoretical logic behind this whole thing. So I'll take questions in a second, but now look at this. What's going on with the 6th house? So you see there's some places that are blind. There's 4 spots that are blind. In other words, there's 4 places that I just can't see at all. It's the ones that are outside of my peripheral vision. That's going to be 4 and 12. If you're outside of my peripheral vision, 2 and 12. I can't see you if you're right here. I can't see I can't see my fingers unless I move my eyes. So that's like 2 and 12. And then it's 11 for some reason on the left side. I still can't see it. But if you go 3 over here, I can slightly see it with my right eye. I'm not for real, but this is the way that the vision pattern goes with the planets. And then for some reason, there's some problem about the 6th house. There's some like speck in the planet's vision. There's some like pillar or something in the way that no planet can see into the 6th house. It's too tough, maybe. It has a wall. There's something that's blocking the vision. And this becomes very important when you go and you think about what he said, Teish Fundri Andri Vidya Kramat. It incrementally decreases through these things. So as I said we would look at this in 2 steps of complexity. This is the first step. The second step is this: moving from 7 to 8. What if Venus is sitting in space 1 and Jupiter is sitting in between space 7 and 8, like halfway between it? Which one is it? Is it 100 or is it 75? It's halfway between 100 and 75. That's what he means by saying Vidya Kramat. And in other texts that's explicitly spelled out, like Parashara or Shastra will actually tell you the math for how to figure it out. Rule of 3 math. So if you're at 180 degrees, it's 100%. If you're at 210 degrees, it's 75%. If you're at 195, it's about 85%, 88%. It's halfway between 75 and 100. So an interesting thing happens with the 6th because the 6th is this blind spot right next to the 7th, which is fully visible. And this is the root behind the Persian Western concept that aspects are different whether they're applying or separating. That there's usually, in most cases, a different ramp, whether you're coming towards something or moving away from it. And the strongest instance of that is in the most common aspect, which is straight across from you. As you're coming up to the 7th house angle from something, from the 6th, you're rapidly increasing your vision on it, and that's an applying aspect. And then, so you notice something really changing strongly as you approach the aspect point. And then when you go from 7 to 8 and even 9, it just falls off at a constant rate. Less dramatic. So, remember before when I said don't just assume that something it's in the 7th house from something else gets an aspect? This is why. So let's say that you have Jupiter in Aries at 1 degree. As if Jupiter is in Aries and Venus is in Libra, then you think that they're mutually aspecting each other. But if Jupiter is at 1 degree of Aries, and Venus is at 29 degrees of Libra, then that is practically, Jupiter is much less than 180 degrees. It's close to 150. It's like 151 degrees or 152 degrees. So it's actually in Venus's blind spot, even though they're 7 signs away from each other. Venus's aspect on Jupiter is ineffectual. But going the other direction, Venus is more almost in Jupiter's 8th position. 8 is usually 210, so Venus is at like 208. So it's going to be around 76%. So here where you think you have a mutual aspect, you don't. And where you think that Venus is influencing Jupiter, it's not at all. It's only Jupiter influencing Venus. This is where it becomes very important to use the actual system and not the watered down or simplified system. And then this is what people will give you other explanations of sometimes the aspect blah blah blah. The aspect system is not important, or blah 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 blah. So many like ideas of why sometimes aspects don't work, when actually it's a very simple problem. There wasn't an aspect to begin with. Okay, so here on the screen you can see, hopefully, you can see, I think I'll know what I'll do next time. I'll kind of darken the area behind where the image is. You see now what he means by every planet gets progressively lower in those places. So let me show you this. I'll help you to make this visual about this kramat, Vidya kramat, this incremental sequence of decreasing. You see the brightness, like for any planet, the 7th house it sees very clear. The 8th house it sees 75%. So I actually did this in Photoshop. Like here's a 75% opacity of this color on the 8th house, and a 50% opacity on the 9th, and a 25% opacity on the 10th. And it's gradiated. So you see how there's kind of like a brightness right in the middle of the 7th house, but it kind of fades as it moves out to the 10th, and it goes away very quickly as it goes to the 6th. Then if you look in 5, 4, and 3, it comes back again, sorta. That's the visual pattern for most planets. And that's why the simplified version of it is kind of acceptable. The simplified version of it, that every planet aspects the 7th house, it's kind of acceptable, because it's basically what it is. If you look with your eye right away, you'll just see a big bright light in 7. Yeah. You want to give me 1 second? I'll put a black thing behind this. Or actually, I'll do this. Give me 1 second so you can see this more clearly. Come on. What do I have to do? Maybe I can't do this while streaming. Yeah, I probably can't do this while streaming. That's unfortunate. Maybe I can. Hang on a sec. If I turn this off. No, I still can't. Wrong side. Is it any better? You see? Then this is what it looks like for most planets. Come on. Let me see if I can add something. Probably not, right? I would need to add color source. Ooh, I got you. You're going to be able to see this very clear in a second. Just you wait and see. Bam. I got your back, right? Now you can see it clear enough, right? I can even give myself a little bit more light and turn this baby back on. That's the aspect pattern more clearly seen. So now let me show you this next one. This is Mars. So as you can see now with Mars, it's got a, now red is not really fair because it's not as bright as yellow, sorry, but you could see really the notable part about Mars is that it's got this big, strong, wide band between 7 and 8. And this is something very unusual that no other planet has. Every other planet has a point where it has 100% aspect, but Mars has a whole 30-degree span where it has 100% aspect. So Mars actually is very influential if you stand in front of it. You get a lot of influence from Mars, but still it has a blind spot in the 6th. So you see how the color falls off between 7 and 6, and then it stays constant between 7 and 8, and then it falls off as normal to 9 and 10. And also it has a very strong aspect on the 4th. So whereas most planets just had a little bit of brightness and visibility on the 4th house, Mars has a strong one. And again, that 4th house is going to peak up to it, have an applying effect on it from the 3rd to the 4th, and then the dissipate is slow as it goes. These are also how transits will work. That's why you get applying and separating. Or that's another application for applying and separating. That's Mars, the way Mars's visual pattern actually looks. You see what I mean? How like if you're halfway between 8 and 9 from Mars, then it's halfway between 100% and 50%. So if you were literally halfway between the 8th angle and the 9th angle, which would be 210 plus 15, 225 degrees. If planet B is 225 degrees from Mars, then it would be, the aspect that Mars would have on it would be halfway between 150, which is 75%. Now remember, the Mars might not be right in the middle of its house. It might be at 1 degree of its house. So you have to actually look at the degrees of the planets. Again, that's something that is not done in popular Vedic astrology. In 70% of the Vedic astrology that's being done. This is Jupiter's pattern. It's very strong. Mars had a special thing where it had a full band between 7 and 8, but look at Jupiter. Jupiter has an almost full band between 7 and 9. And Jupiter has a very strong thing going on with the 5th house too, with a really long application to it. From 3 and 4, it gradually gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and it peaks in 5, then it drops off right away to 6, ramps up again right away to 7, and then goes down just a little bit to 8. Still, remember I said like 70% and above is still in a significant aspect. So you still have a significant aspect from Jupiter all the way from 7, which is 180 degrees, all the way through 8, which is 210, all the way up to 9, 9 is all the way back at full power again, 240, and then it drops off sharply, going from between 240 and 270. This is Jupiter's aspect pattern. And then Saturn's. Saturn's is really wide. And it's to unexpected places. It's got this power on the 10th and the 3rd that no other planet even compares to. So it's kind of getting a significant aspect almost everywhere, except to its blind spots. And to the 50% points, not so much. So Saturn is a real powerhouse with aspects. You see, it ramps up right away from peripheral vision to the 3rd house. All of a sudden, it can see you right away. Then it drops off gradually as you go through the 4th, which is 90 degrees, and as you go to the 5th, which is 120. Then it's gone in the 6th, 150. Comes back up just like everybody else, really strong, at 180 to the 7th house. Gradually drops off just like everybody through the 8th and 9th, which is 210 and 240 degrees. Then it comes back again strong to the 10th at 100%, and then drops off sharply in the 11th. So I think that's it. That explains it, my friends. Any questions? That's the real Vedic aspect system. Let's take a look and see what you guys got on your chats. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Marie. Yeah, thank you very much. Let's look up. I'll look from the beginning. And Samurai, see if you have anything for me. Right, the trines are always the same element, and then the semi-sextile in opposition is always the compatible element. But that's for signs only, and it won't be true with the actual degrees. You may have a planet that's in a water sign having a trine aspect on a planet that is in a fire sign, because the planet from the water sign might be at the end of the water sign, and the planet in the fire sign might be at the beginning of it. So now Galibji Tasnimul Galib says, does he elaborate the impact of the different aspects? So that is a Persian development. What the Persians said was, well, Jupiter is the planet that's giving a full aspect on trines, and Mars and Saturn are the planets that are giving full aspects at squares. So when planets, so we're revising the system so that any planet can have a trine on either side, and any planet can have a square on either side. But when they form those angles to each other, they have the nature of the planets from which the angle originates. That's the Persian, that is most probably, in my opinion, that's the root of the Persian theory. And hence they have the concept that trine angles are a benefic effect, a helpful effect, and square angles are a confrontational effect, a malefic effect. And that the opposition is kind of unknown. It could be, it's intense, it could be either or, because everybody has the opposition. So, to be clear, no, he doesn't say anything about that, because that's a later development with how Persian astrology riffed on this. But it's implied here that benefic, that trine's aspects are the nature of Jupiter. So it's implied that they have a Jupiterian feel to them. Square aspects are the nature of Saturn and Mars. So the Persian system is implied in it, but not explicit. Well, that's interesting. Marie says, in Hellenistic astrology, the planets could only see forward. Zena says she's never heard of this before. That's the shame, really, because this is everywhere. It's not like this is only found in Phaladipika. This is in every actual classic Vedic astrology textbook. Especially the big one these days, which is Brihadarashara Shastri. Goes even further and gives you the actual math. Like, he literally spells out how you do the ratios in between the points. But people don't care. They would just rather watch YouTube. They don't care about the source material. Because they're lazy bums. It's the same thing, imagination land. How do you interpret the eighth aspect? We don't. That's not the system. In Vedic astrology, how do you interpret aspects? Goes like this. If Venus has an aspect on this other planet, then it's a Venusian influence on the planet. That's how if Mars has an aspect on the planet, then it's a Martial influence on the planet. That's basic. That's the basic fundamental point of how you interpret aspects. It makes perfect, clear sense. It's perfect, perfectly simple. And furthermore, you can say if Venus, from such and such a sign, is aspecting this planet, so it's the influence of Venus from such and such a sign, and Venus from such and such a house. Those are sub points. Zena says, if it's below 50, is it more of a subconscious effect? It's like this, like my son is very sensitive to noise, so I keep telling him, but he refuses to do it, that he should have white noise playing in his room. Because if there's like a lot of noise going on, then you don't hear certain things. But then when it's quiet, you hear everything. So that's the same way that I said before, like how much aspect should be considered an aspect. Objectively speaking, if it's getting close to 75%, you'll hear it, you'll see it, you'll feel it. Subjectively speaking, if it's the loudest sound in the room, you'll hear it, even if it's quiet. So that's what I mean. If you have a planet that has no aspects except a 50% aspect from some other planet, then that 50% aspect will be felt. But if you have a planet where it has a 50% aspect, a 70% aspect, and a 100% aspect, it's really only the 100% aspect that's going to be felt. The other ones are going to be subliminal, not just sub-flavoring, subtextual. Liberty, maybe a dumb question, but does station and retrogression affect the strength of the aspect? I believe so. Because I've noticed, I noticed it for sure in Trump's analysis. And it's certainly so in transiting, that the station and the aspect affect the intensity of the stationing and the retrogression. The speed of the planet, basically, affects the intensity of the aspect because it keeps that aspect active for a longer amount of time. So that's not a debatable point. That's just a fact. But in a birth chart, does it make a difference? I would say yes, because the child has been born under the conditions where this planet has been affected by this aspect for a long time. For someone who can see, is the fifth aspect 25 or 50? It's 50. Now you can see, right? Karen, is that why enemies reside in the sixth house, because it's a blind spot? It could be. The sixth house is a very tough place. This might be why you can't peer into it. And this might be why only Saturn can peer into 3 and 10. 6, 3, and 10 are the trine, which is very tough. These are the 6, 3, and 10 are Earth, right? 6, 3, and 10. 2, 6, and 10 are Earth. But 3, 6, and 10 are the tough ones. They're just the tough houses. So only Saturn can pierce 3 and 10, but nobody pierces 6. I don't know. I really honestly don't know why. It's like somebody said, it's like in a blind, when you're driving, there's a certain spot in your mirror that you can't see. It's just because of the angle is weird. But yeah, that may help you remember about the 6th house, or help you remember that the 6th is blind. Enemies are there, they're not letting you see them. Or the way I'm saying it is, it's a very tough place. It has a shell on it. So I think I've answered your question, Marie, about how you interpret the aspects. Bardo wants to know what software is more accurate. It's not accurate or not accurate. Either software has the option to calculate this way or it doesn't. I don't think that there's a software out there that wouldn't have this somewhere in the settings where you could get this information. If it does, you know that a complete noob made the software, or they just made it for like Cosmo readers. It's like, you don't want to use a software that doesn't have the option. Sorry, I didn't mean to insult Cosmo readers, but like, you know, like the Cosmo level of astrology. So any software has like Parashar's Light, Kala, Jehora. Everybody has the option to get this information. Most people just don't use it. Because every developer who would develop a software knows about this. Second house and 12th house are invisible. They're too peripheral. First house is perhaps, you can say, invisible, but in the first house, you get a lot of effect. But that's obvious. That's from the conjunction. So in the first house, you wouldn't get the planets influencing each other by aspect, but you get them influencing each other by conjunction, which is a similar affair. The closeness of the conjunction increases the intensity of the effect, and also the declination of the conjunction increases the effect. You're welcome, Denise. I'm just reading along with the Parashar, with the Phaladipika, and explaining to you what it means. So you take the degree that the planet is at in its own sign, and the exact aspect is to the degrees in the other house, right? So for example, if the sun is at 15 degrees of Aries, then it is actually not going to see 0 and 1 degree of Libra very much at all. It'll be about 50% aspect on that. But if the sun is at 15 degrees of Aries, then it will 100% see 15 degrees of Libra, and the rest of Libra pretty well too. If you get it, that's how you do it. So when you actually calculate it, you just do subtraction of the degrees and you get an absolute degree. Thank you, Om. If there's a 50% aspect Liberty S on a house a planet is ruler over, the strength of the aspect remains. So this is also interesting. What Liberty is brought up here is points which can receive aspects are not only planets, but any point can receive an aspect. So there's another important point besides a planet. It's the angles in the sky, like the midhaven, right? And also the cuspal points of the houses. So the cuspal point, you can see how much of an influence a planet has on a house by how much of an aspect it has on the cuspal point of that house, which doesn't mean where the house begins in whole sign astrology. It means the ascending degree in that sign. So if your ascendant is 24 degrees Capricorn and your Jupiter is at 24 degrees Libra, then your Jupiter has a tremendous effect on Libra in the 10th house. And it has a tremendous effect upon the opposite sign from Libra, which is Aries, in the 4th house. And it has a tremendous effect on 2 houses over from that, the 6th, and 2 houses the other way. That's the trines. Because it's lined up with the cusp point. So houses can also receive aspects to their point, to their cusp. Midhaven, Imkolai. Purana Singh, do conjunction and aspect have similar effects? Yeah. Thank you. Jupiter in Aries at 1 degree, Kate says, has absolutely no influence on Venus in 29 degrees, simply because it's in the up. No, right. See, now, Kate, you've asked where the orb. Just rewind this video and watch it. Orb is something that the Persian system adopts because they're dealing with static angles that are, so they can have a concept of a static orb of influence. But the Vedic system has dynamic angles. Not every angle is the same. Not every planet has the same type of vision. So we don't have a static sense of an orb of influence. We have this thing called the Andrividyakramat, that the influence gradually lessens or increases as you move to the point. So if you're between the 6th point, 150 degrees, and the 7th point, 180 degrees, you get a steady increase. And at a certain point, it's going to cross above a threshold, which I'm suggesting the orb thing for us is 70-ish% of aspect or above, or just the strongest aspect on the planet. In conjunction is the planet with the lower degree. Well, this class is not about conjunctions, Marisa. I could be a cranky person and not explain that to you. But to not be cranky because you're nice. I would say the planet with the higher declination will take the precedence. Or the planet with the higher bala will take the precedence. Or you can consider both. Do some sort of math to consider both at the same time. Does retrogression change the direction of aspects? Asks Liberty. That's a fascinating question. So far I have not seen that said. But I wouldn't rule it out that it may be so. It's something that I would like to. What I've noticed in working on the house report that I'm still working on is retrogression, man, really does seem to have a important effect, more about the interpretation than about the calculation. But I'm also open to the idea that maybe retrogression. But with certain planets are symmetrical. Jupiter is symmetrical, so the retrogression would make no difference there. But I know that the Jupiter retrogression does make a difference on the interpretation. So I think the retrogression is more of an interpretive difference. Does the whole system only make sense if we know the exact degree of the lugna? No. As long as you know the degrees of the two planets, roughly, then you can use a system. If you're trying to calculate the influence to houses, then you must know the degree of the lugna. It doesn't have to be exact to the second. It has to be approximate, but you have to know the degree. Okay. So, thank you very much. Glad you guys enjoyed this. And I'll see you next week for more Phaladipika. And I'll see you in 2 days for more Bhagavatam.